Hello, my name is Bob Kunz, and I'm the host of this episode of Construction Safety Perspectives. With me today is Rena Harrington. Rena's son, Justin, was involved in a workplace accident that resulted in his death. This accident occurred on January 18th of 2018 in the town of Gloucester. We're going to be speaking about this. Justin survived by Rena, his sister, Laura, and his father, Paul. We're going to be speaking about the circumstances surrounding the fatal accident and the circumstances and the actions and the activities that followed. And then we'll speak about Rena's involvement in the United Support and Memorial for Workplace Fatalities. I think that part of it is really a story about resilience, something that's really left an imprint on me. Rena and I have been in conversation about this podcast for the better part of a year now, and we're both looking forward to discussing that. How are you, Rena?
I'm good. How are you, Bob?
Great, thank you. I guess maybe the best place to start is before this day, from a video that I saw online that you worked with OSHA on. It's on YouTube. And you spoke so well about how Justin would play with equipment in the sandbox and his aspirations to get onto bigger equipment. He was in an environment where he could operate equipment. This is something that he really enjoyed, sounds like.
Yes. Yeah. When he was a little boy, he loved to play in the dirt, play with dump trucks. And, as he grew older, he wanted to work in construction. And at the time of his death, he was getting ready to take classes to get his CDL. And he also was studying for his hoisting license. He was about to take the test before he passed on that. So he was going to be making construction his life's work.
So he really was looking forward to really growing the opportunities that that construction was offering to him.
Yes.
That's awesome. Sometimes when we're sitting around the dinner table or just out enjoying the sunlight, conversations about work come up. Did Justin ever express his contentment, his feelings? Did he talk about safety or concerns about that in the workplace at all before this incident?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I was told by his girlfriend at the time, they lived together, that he was concerned about this particular job site, the way things were set up, the way the house was set up, and the fact that he was underneath, and the creaking and the moaning that went on with the house itself. He did express concern over that.
And I imagine, someone who's really interested and given an opportunity in the industry, maybe just starting out. He was 27 years old at the time of his death. Mm-hmm. Maybe 34 now.
He would have been 34 this past January.
Yeah. And I know we spoke earlier this year about, January just being a really difficult month for you.
Yes, his birthday is January 3rd and his death anniversary is January 18th.
And I can imagine, given that opportunity, it must be difficult, has to be difficult to come forward with a concern to your employer about safety, about your own safety or the safety of others or the safety of those who may not be involved. Did he? Are you aware of any conversations that he had about? I don't feel safe, but I'm also concerned about bringing that forward.
Mm-hmm. I think he did. I recall his girlfriend telling me that he did express concerns about his safety to his supervisor, and his supervisor said that's the job and pretty much walked away. So, and I know he being 27 years old, he would not have known that he had options. He would not have known that he had the right to inform OSHA that he didn't feel safe and to request an inspection. He wouldn't have known any of those things as a young person.
Right. I know. It's just a terrible spot to be in, right?
Right.
You're on a job that you love, you're earning money, you're supporting the household that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And just to think about walking away from that has to be a tremendously difficult decision.
Mm-hmm.
So Rena did speak about OSHA's complaint process. If you go on OSHA's website, there's a way to file a complaint. There's any number of ways to do that. Each employer is supposed to have a Know Your Rights poster on the job site, which provides access for that information as well.
Mm-hmm.
So if I just want to take a moment, I do have the benefit of OSHA's investigation summary, and I just thought it might be helpful to kind of frame out what this the circumstances included. So the incident occurred at 9:30 on the 18th of January. Justin was assigned to operate a compact backhoe to begin excavation of a basement at a residential property. He was working alone.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it sounds like his boss and another employee were on their way to the job site.
Yes.
Justin was digging in a corner of the basement and became caught between the backhoe and seems like some sort of temporary support beam.
The I-beam, yes.
And that ended up imperiled him and caused him to be crushed, and that was the cause of his death.
Yes, they believe that the backhoe attachment, the claw, caught on some rock bedding and it propelled him up, and his back and neck came in contact with the I-beam, and then at the same time his chest came over the controls. So there was no way that he could extricate himself, and he became crushed between the machine itself and the I-beam. And the pressure was so great that the hydraulic line split, and he was covered in hydraulic fluid, and that's actually how his boss found him, was by following the trail of hydraulic fluid.
Oh, my goodness. At some point, you were notified. Did the employer reach out to you, or how did you learn about this?
So I was informed, and a lot of people were upset about how I was informed. I was at work. I worked in an office, and I was just coming out of a meeting, and I got paged overhead that I had a phone call from the receptionist. And at the time, my office sat behind the receptionist area, and when I came around the corner, she peeked her head out at me and said, "Rena, it's the Danvers police." So I went in my office and shut the door, took the call, and he identified himself as a Danvers police officer. And then he proceeded to ask me some questions, verify my address, verify my name. And then he asked me if I had a son named Justin. And I said, yes. What is this about? And he said, I need you to take down this number. And he gave me the number, and the number was to the non-emergency line to the Gloucester police. And he said to ask for this detective. And he said, promise me you're going to do this the minute you hang up from me. And I said, okay. And I hung up. I called the number. I hit the 3-digit extension, and the detective didn't pick up, and I hung up. And I just thought it was really weird, And so I went over to my supervisor's office across the hall, and I told her what was going on. And she said, do you want me to come with you? We'll call again. And I said, okay. So we went back into my office and shut the door. And she said, this time, don't hit the extension, hit 0 so you get the dispatcher. And so I did, and the dispatcher came on the line, and I told him who I was, and I said, I got a call from the Danvers police, something to do with my son, Justin. I said, what is going on with my son? And the Gloucester police officer said, no one from the Danvers police came to see you? And I said, no, they called, and they asked me to call you. And he said, let me see if I can find the detective. And he put me on hold for a few seconds, and then he came back. And he said, the detective isn't here. Do you mind calling back? And by this time, I was upset. And I said, no, I'm not calling back. You need to tell me what's going on with my son right now. I said, no one is telling me anything. And then he said, is there anybody with you? And I said, yes, my supervisor is sitting here. And he said, I'm very sorry to have to tell you this over the phone, but your son was in a construction accident at work, and he's passed away. And now the problem with that was that the Danvers Police Department was located directly across the street from my office building. And the protocol should have been that they had sent an officer over and spoken to me in private, and that didn't happen.
They could have literally walked across.
They could have walked across the street, and they didn't.
Yeah.
And this was under a different chief. I mean, this was 7 years ago, but that's how I was told about my son's incident.
Oh, there's really no excuse for that.
No, there isn't. And it's strange because when I had to have somebody go get my daughter, and I had to tell my daughter in my office with 5 or 6 people in my office, including the CEO, a couple of VPs, a director of social workers, that her brother passed away, that I had just gotten a call from the police. And so we left to go tell his dad. And but 5 minutes into the ride over to Peabody, my daughter got a call from her uncle saying, "We have your dad. We're going back to Gloucester." So we turned around and we headed back up to Gloucester. And about 5 minutes into the ride, all of a sudden, Laura said, "Oh my God, Mom, it's on Facebook." There was a news media helicopter shot of the house. And it was, the caption just read, "Construction worker killed." It didn't have his name. But the problem was people were sharing it on Facebook. Yes. And Gloucester is a very small, tight-knit community. And we started to panic, thinking someone's going to see this and recognize it. So we had to start calling people from the car. And I called These are relatives? Yes. So I called my husband at the time and told him to get to my dad's and my 2 sisters. And Laura was trying to get a hold of his girlfriend at the time. And we got to my dad's house, and he was sitting on the couch. And God bless him, he's 82 years old. He's a police scanner junkie. He listens to police scanner all day long. But on that day, I walked up to him, and I got down on my knees, and I just took his hand. And I said, "Dad," I got a phone call from the police a little while ago. There's been an accident. I said, "It's Justin. And he was in some kind of an accident at work, and he's passed away." And my dad just for 2 seconds just stared at me, and then he burst into tears. And he said, "Oh my God." He said, "I was listening to the whole exchange between the Gloucester and the Danvers police departments all morning long because they were looking for you," meaning me. They were trying to find me as his next of kin. And then my husband arrived, and I asked him to take me to the police station. And we got there, and the detective came out, and he had some things with him, and he said, "These are some of Justin's things." And he handed me his wallet, his car keys, and his cell phone. And that's when it started to get real for me. And I said to the detective, "What happened?" And he proceeded to tell me. He said, "This looks like preliminarily," he said, "OSHA's been called. They're going to get in touch with you." He said, "But right now it looks like it was a freak accident." And then he proceeded to tell me how my son died. And as a mother, when you hear something so catastrophic like this that has happened to your child, your brain does things to protect you. It really does. And my brain immediately went to, it was instant. He was here 1 minute, he was gone the next. He didn't feel any pain. And that's the way it was. And it wasn't until I read, a year later or so, I read the OSHA report and the medical examiner's report and the police reports, that I know now, today, that it wasn't instant, that it took a few minutes, and that he may have known what was happening to him at the time. And as a mother, I have to live.
Difficult for you.
I have to live with this as a mother, because as a mother, your one job is to protect your children. It doesn't matter how old they are. And I carry that guilt that I didn't protect him on that day. And it was amazing that he died at 9:30 in the morning, and I wasn't informed until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I feel like I should have felt some kind of shift in the earth. But I didn't, and I live with that kind of guilt too, that how come I did not know that my child died?
So it's just a tragic set of circumstances. Mm-hmm. I mean, the ripple effect.
Yes.
I mean, I'm hoping this podcast reaches out to members of the policing agency, or small employers, and just to let them understand, like, those being empathetic, creating workplace practices that allow people to get in touch with emergency contacts are really important.
It's very important. He worked for a very small employer, 1 or 2 kids and the owner. That was it. And the owner actually, when he found Justin, he actually had a heart attack on the scene and was taken away in an ambulance. So I had no contact with him until he got out of the hospital. So everything that I learned was from the police. And, you know, part of what I say today is, especially with these small employers, is that they need to constantly keep up on their emergency contacts with their employees. You know, every year they should be checking in with their employees and saying, has your emergency contact information changed? Who are we going to contact in case something happens? Who do we contact in case you get hurt? So that's one of the big things that I talk about now, you know, when I do go out and speak, is it's so important for these small employers, you know, to make sure that they are in tune with their employees and that their employees are receiving the correct safety training for the equipment they're going to be using. And in my son's case, the rental company dropped the machine off and said, that's on, that's off, this is this is that. Boom, and that was it. Very quick tutorial, and that was
orientation about where the controls are.
Right, that was it. Yeah. That was it. So it was a lack of safety training is what the citation was on.
I see. Any thoughts? You know, OSHA is a very large organization. To outside of making a formal complaint or informal complaint, you know, received from a worker that has concerns, to identify that discrete, unique work location at a residential property becomes almost nearly impossible for OSHA. Have you given any thought about where the building official who's issuing the building permit, you know, what role they might play in creating a safe workplace? Or if they're coming in to do inspections, you know, should they be available to evaluate whether it's being maintained in a safe manner or consistent with plans, and then empower them to make calls to OSHA, for example?
Yes, I agree with that. I think it's important for, I never even really thought about the inspector or how the site was inspected at all. I wasn't told anything about, or it probably is in the OSHA report. I just haven't read it in a really long time.
So there might be an opportunity for the building officials, if you're out there listening, for you to have your eyes and ears open when you're going to these maybe smaller job sites.
Yes.
And just to maybe even talk to employees once in a while about their experience on the job.
Yes.
We'll just talk a little bit about your employer. I mean, we've discussed this a couple of times, and the circumstances, it was just like this unbelievable set of circumstances that placed you in the arms of this loving, caring organization. And, you know, both Laura and yourself were there in their embrace.
Yes. So I started working for that company in March of 2017, and he passed in 2018. So it was about 9 months I had worked for this employer. I was their clinical recruiter. I hired all their nursing staff, and my daughter, she still works for the company, and she's in medical records. And but it's a hospice agency, so they deal with death and dying all the time. When this happened, you know, we were given as much time off as we needed to. And we also offered grief counseling services that we both took advantage of. And we were able to see a grief counselor on a weekly basis for an entire year, free of charge.
Oh, my goodness.
Because of my employer.
Wow.
Yeah. And one other thing that I just wanted to mention, it's almost like the universe like aligned things to put things in place, knowing what was about to happen. And the other thing I just wanted to mention, that I got a phone call probably 3 or 4 days before he passed from someone that I went to high school with, and I hadn't talked to for 30-something years. And he was like, "Hey, you remember me? It's Kevin." And he was, we graduated high school. He moved to Pennsylvania, got married, and he became a chaplain. And
goodness, wow.
I said, he said, yeah, I'm a chaplain. And I'm like, get out of here. I'm knowing what he was like in high school.
Right.
I was like, really, Kev?
What a pivot.
Yeah. And he's like, yeah. And he said, I'm back up here in Gloucester. And he said, I applied for a job. I need a job. And I had an opening. And it turns out, I found this out when I came back from work, that I had scheduled his interview with a hiring manager for January 18th.
Oh, my goodness.
And he was the first one that showed up at the wake. And he said, Rena, I just wanted you to know that they hired me, and I'm going to be here for you for whatever you need. And I swear to God, I would not have made it through that first year without him, because what do you do? You question God, you question everything, you get angry with God, and he just had a way of explaining things that, and how grief worked, and what he said made sense to me, literally made sense to me. So I really believe in that all these things line up for a reason, that these support services were put in place even before his incident, and that they were there already for me when I needed them.
And you had a prior relationship, just schoolmates.
Yeah.
Back in high school, and here he is.
Yeah, out of the blue, right a few days before.
Literally divine intervention.
Yes,
yeah.
I believe in that. Yes, I do. I have to.
Yeah, so your employers offering hospice care.
Well, they offer grief counseling.
Grief counseling.
Yes,
oh, okay.
They offer grief counseling. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, because he wasn't on hospice.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, I understand now. So.
And the reason I came to them was because my mother was on their service, and she had passed in 2015.
I see.
Yeah, and that's how I became aware of this company.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just unbelievable set of circumstances. Did Justin's employer, you understand that you said that his boss had a heart attack at the project when he found out about Justin's passing.
Mm-hmm.
Did you hear from them at all at any point to maybe reach out and see how you were doing, or the needs that the family had, or was it more focused on just exchanging insurance information?
Well, I did. I know that. So he passed away on a Thursday, and then I had his cell phone, and it was charging in my kitchen, and on Saturday morning, and it rang, and somebody was calling it, and I looked down, and it said his name, and it said boss, and I said, oh. So I answered it, and he said, is this Justin's mother? And I said, yes, it is. And he identified himself, and he said, I'm so sorry it's taken me this long to contact you. I've been in the hospital. I had a heart attack when I was trying to get Justin down off the machine. And he asked me to come and meet with him. So I did. And he, gave me his last paycheck and to give to his girlfriend. And we talked, and I really don't remember the conversation too much at all. But, he felt terrible. He feels awful. And I know for a few years after, I don't know if he's still doing this, but I know for a few years after, he was faithfully going to church every Sunday. People were telling me they saw him in church. And I think he carries that guilt, of what happened. So, but that's basically the only interaction I've ever had with him.
Any thoughts, insights, comments that you would like to share with employers? If there's one of their employees passing, their family, they're still connected with their family. Any thoughts on what that communication is like?
I think it's hard. I've talked to a lot of families that when these incidences happen, and I know this happened with Justin's employer too, is that the job still needs to get done. And it's very hurtful to the families that the very next day there's people working on that job. And I think that, employers are looking at it from a business side, and I understand that. And I know the families do. But it's hard, and I can only imagine for his other couple of kids that he was working with to have to go back to that job site and finish that job, knowing what happened the day before. I can't imagine what those kids were thinking. But it's really hard because I have a family member whose son was killed in an aggregate mine, and it was like one day she lived next door to the mine too, the mother, and that day the machines were all stopped, but the very next day they started up again, and it was hurtful. It's hurtful, that the job, I understand, we all understand the job needs to get done, but it might be nice just for the employer to take a day, acknowledge what happened, let the employees gather together and even talk to each other about how they feel about this. Even just something little like that, I think would go a long way for employees to appreciate their employer when something like this happens.
So have a conversation just to recognize the contribution that Justin made, the interactions they had,
right?
And just to reflect on those moments, and maybe even talk about what we can do together to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Right.
Yeah. I could definitely see the value in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. At some point, you heard from the police that OSHA had been notified.
Yes.
At some point, you received a phone call or a letter or some sort of communication from OSHA. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, there was a bit of confusion, and I found out later that this was the reason why it took so long for the police to identify me. The hours in between was because I had recently renewed my driver's license and with an updated address in Danvers. And I also, just the day before, 2 days before, I purchased a new cell phone with a new number. And so no one could get a hold of me. And so I got a letter in the mail. It was probably mid-February of that year. And it was from my local North Andover OSHA office area director. And he said, we've been trying to get in touch with you, but we don't have a working phone number. Would you please give me a call? And so I did. I called him, and we spoke. And he said, I am so, so very sorry for the loss of your son. And then he proceeded to tell me what the procedure would be, that, they will take the full 6 months. But any insights or anybody you talk to or anything that has anything to say about that day or was there that day, text messages, if you have text messages. I know there was text messages on his phone, on Justin's phone, between him and his boss that they were really interested in. And so we provided all of that information to OSHA. And then, again, it wasn't until 6 months. It was actually closer to 7 months before I got the call that the investigation had been completed. And I remember the area director telling me, I can remember this almost word for word. He said, please understand that the citation amount, dollar amount, does not reflect the fact that there was a death. We can only cite the violation. We cannot cite for a fatality. And that, it was like a smack in the face, the amount, what they were talking about. And I just couldn't understand it. And he called it a, not a willful, but a serious violation. There was, I think, 1 or 2 serious violations. And the employer ended up contesting, and they sat down to a formal hearing, and the citation amount was reduced, which, again, was insulting to me.
Naturally.
Yeah.
Right.
And I mean, you cannot put a dollar amount on your child's life. And, what bothered me in the years later, until I learned more about OSHA, was the fact that how can you cite a small tax business in Lynn $130,000 for a mask violation, but yet a fatality is only worth $4,000? That it just blows my mind. It's like, how does that work? But I understand it now. I've learned enough about, working closely with OSHA as I do now, I understand that their hands are tied and they can only do so much. And I get that now. I understand it. But a lot of parents don't. A lot of people don't.
Your first reaction
is... And your first reaction is... Right.
It makes sense.
It doesn't make sense.
My son's life is priceless.
Right.
And here
exactly.
we are...
quibbling over a few $1,000s.
The original penalty was like $3,880.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just doesn't make it doesn't make sense.
Right. Well, the employer also got dinged by NIOSH, so he had to pay a fine there too.
I see.
Yeah. Yeah.
You said something earlier that I just want to go back to.
Sure.
Relative to the change in license.
Mm-hmm.
Does the license application have a phone number on it? Is that how did the police or how does OSHA get your phone number? Were they able to get your phone number through the license?
No, the police were able to get my phone number from social media.
Oh, no kidding.
They reached out to social media, but then actually the Gloucester police, how do I say this? My son's uncle was the president of a local bank in Gloucester and knew a lot of the police officers. And when they started to figure out who I was, they went to him and he verified that I was the next of kin.
I see.
I was the mother. That's how the police ended up finding out about me. And they called me on my work phone.
I see.
That's how that happened.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And they used social media.
They used social media to find me.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I listed where I worked on social media, and so that's why they called my place of employment.
And the reason I bring it up is because I think it's important to understand how the policing agency acquires information in a time of crisis,
mm-hmm.
in this case, right?
Yes.
So the breadcrumbs you leave, on social media, if you will,
mm-hmm.
For example, was a way for them to connect, get in connection with you, right?
Right, exactly. And my daughter and I did have the opportunity to sit down with the chief of police because everyone in our company was so very upset over the way I was informed. And so my daughter and I met with the chief at the time, and it was just the policy of the department to flip it back to, the Gloucester police. But I talked to the chief at Gloucester. He called me and he said, if I had known that that's the way they were going to handle it, I would have sent my detective up to meet you. But we did have the opportunity to listen to the tape, the recordings between the Gloucester and the Danvers police, and how frantic they were in trying to find out who I was, and the back and forth. So I am sympathetic to that piece of it,
sure.
Because they were frantically trying to find me.
I mean, it can't be easy for even career, law enforcement and officials to knock on a door or to make that call. It just can't be easy.
No, and I had said that to the chief. I said it's part of your job. It's not a nice part of your job, but it's part of your job. And he stuck to his policy and said that's what we do. That's on my bucket list, is to go back to the new chief and discuss this and see if I can't get this changed.
Sounds like you should, right? Yeah.
It's on my bucket list.
Very important, like really important.
It's very important.
Yeah. Over the course of 6 months, OSHA would give you status reports. You'd learn more about where the case stood. And then at some point, the citation, as you said, was finalized. They just didn't mail it to your house, or did they work with you to come to some understanding about how that was going to be communicated to you?
Yes, what they did was they put it on a disc and they mailed it to me. And there was some confusion because there's two companies with very similar names, Justin's employer and another company, and it went to that wrong company. So there was a delay in getting it to me because they mailed it to the wrong company. So it came to us in a disc that we just put in the computer, and we're able to look at it from there.
I see.
That's how we got to it. But I was told ahead of time that this was coming.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Just don't go to your mailbox and open it up and
right.
Be there by yourself opening up.
Right.
That.
And I think that's very important because I have heard in the years since from other family members that one woman in North Dakota said that it just dropped into her email one day, no warning whatsoever. It was the OSHA report on her husband. And I think it's very important for OSHA officials to understand that family members, next of kin, they need to be prepped for this. You can't just drop it in the mail or drop it into an email without some kind of preparation to the family ahead of time.
And part of that was, sounds like the area director from Andover or Boston, the Boston North office, spent some time discussing, sort of reconciling the value of Justin's life versus the penalty that was being assigned to it.
Yes. No, he did explain that to me. And of course, at the time, it was only 6 months after he passed. And of course, I didn't understand. And I didn't understand at the time. I understand now, but I didn't at the time. Even though he explained it to me, it didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it still doesn't really.
It still doesn't. I'm not going to lie. It still doesn't.
Can you share any information about at some point, Justin was employed, the company he's working for has workers' comp insurance. There's some provisions within the workers' comp regulations for expenses associated with the passing of a worker.
Okay, so I have a real issue with workers' comp. I have a couple issues with them, actually. So the way it was explained to us at the funeral home was that we would be responsible for paying up front. And it was explained to us that workers' comp will reimburse you. So, where he did not have a wife or a child or any dependent, I became the next of kin. And so when the bill came in, I didn't know it at the time, but after doing some research on it, the law in Massachusetts states for workers' comp insurance carriers to pay reasonable expenses for a fallen worker's funeral services. Now, that's a very broad term. And what it does, it allows workers' comp insurance companies to pick and choose what they will pay for in terms of funeral expenses. So in my situation, they would not pay for the flowers for my son's funeral. So his dad and I had to incur that financial burden in paying for flowers. Who has a funeral without flowers?
Right.
And
it seems so petty. It's like
it is. It's petty. And so they didn't pay for that. And I was like, all right, whatever at the time. But some years later, I sat down with my state senator and my district representative, and I told them the story and about workers' comp. And they had no idea.
Interesting.
That was going on. And I said, there's two issues with workers' comp. There's the expenses issue, and then there's subrogation. So the expenses issue, so what they did was they worked, my senator and my district representative worked with the Massachusetts Funeral Directors Association. And there is right now a bill sitting in the Massachusetts legislature right now. It's sitting with the House Ways and Means Committee. It's cleared the Labor and Workforce Development Committee, and it's now sitting with the House Ways and Means Committee. It's bill number 1202. And it would be...
So bill number 1202?
1202.
02, okay.
And it requires workers' compensation insurance carriers to pay all funeral and memorial expenses, which includes the flowers, the headstone, the obituary in the paper. And they raise the payout amount. So as it stands right now in Massachusetts, the payout amount is 8 times the worker's average weekly salary. So Justin was unskilled labor. He was probably making $20, $21 an hour. So 8 times that weekly salary is only going to be a few $1,000s. It's not enough to pay for a funeral. So what they did was they raised it to 10 times the average worker's weekly salary, or $25,000, whichever amount is higher. So that bill is making it, like I said, making its way through the legislature right now. And if anyone's hearing this, if you can call your local representative and push for this bill to get taken up again, I would greatly appreciate it. The other issue with workers' comp is subrogation. And this did also happen to me as well, where subrogation means that workers' comp pays for the funeral expenses of the fallen worker. However, if a family sues a third party and that third party is found liable for the death of the worker, out of any settlement money that the family receives, workers' compensation gets their money back that they paid for the funeral expenses right off the top. And that's wrong. That is wrong. It's cold. It's cruel. It's heartless. It's an insult to the family. And I'll tell you something right now. No amount of settlement money is ever going to make me whole again.
No, that's for sure.
So they didn't want to tackle subrogation because that's a pretty big issue, and I get it. And I think they want to see how this one fares first before they tackle that. But that's a huge problem.
Yeah, to decouple them, I think, to advance the funeral expense makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. It does, yeah, it does. So, yeah, I don't have any love for workers' compensation. Just because a family shouldn't have to go through that.
There's just so many other things. I mean, the emotions just alone.
Yeah.
To have to manage the payment of flower arrangements just seems unnecessarily aggravating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At one point you mentioned to me that you, through OSHA or through some other set of circumstances, got connected with United Support and Memorial for Workplace Fatalities. Could you discuss that a little bit? Because I know that's now like your life's work at this point.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes. So about 2 months after Justin passed, I received a letter in the mail from my area OSHA director. And we'd already had the conversation, about the process and the investigation and everything. So when I opened this letter, he was talking about April 28th being Worker Memorial Day, and that there was a ceremony on the steps of the State House. And all I saw was Worker Memorial Day, and I went, oh, my God. And I threw it right in the trash. I didn't want anything to do with it. And I forgot about it. And then like a year later, he sent me another letter on the same subject, and that one kind of sat on my kitchen table for a bit. And I would go over and look at it, and then I'd walk away, and I'd go back and look at it. And then I ultimately decided not, because I don't drive in Boston. I don't like to go into Boston. And I didn't know enough about it. And I was like, I don't have the energy to research this right now. And so a year goes by. In 2019, in December, late December, it was after Christmas, I just was sitting on my couch on my laptop, and I was reading an article online about another worker that was killed on the job. And at the end of the article, it said, submitted by Tanya Ford, Executive Director and Vice President, United Support and Memorial for Workplace Fatalities, USMWF.org. And I was like, whoa, what is this? And I clicked on the link, and I went all over the webpage, and I just clicked every tab. She had one tab there that had was called Faces Campaign, and she had all of these fallen workers listed. They were listed alphabetically. They were listed by state. And it had a picture of them that was submitted by a family member, and it gave a paragraph or so of what happened to them, whether it was investigated by OSHA, whether it was not in their jurisdiction, what the citation amount was, what the OSHA number was. And I read every single one of those stories, and I was just amazed that there was an organization out there that was so specific, because going to work every day and coming home is something people take for granted. And when you don't come home, it's an unusual way to die, in my opinion, and that people don't expect that. And to have an organization that was specific to this type of fatality was just amazing to me. And I reached out to her, and she called me right away, and we talked for 2 hours. And she was telling me, she said, when you share your story, she said, you're raising awareness, okay, but you're also keeping their memory alive. You're keeping the memory alive. You're raising awareness. You're facilitating change. And she said, when you speak and you tell Justin's story, she said, you're going to be saving the lives of people you don't even know. And that resonated with me. And she said, no pressure. If you want to, it's all volunteer. She said, I'd love to work with you. And so I said, you know what? I need to take a couple days to think about this. And I started to think about, who Justin was as a person, and that how he would do anything for anybody. He'd help out anybody. If somebody needed a ride in the middle of the night, he would just go do it. He wanted everybody to be happy. He wanted to be helpful. And he had the biggest laugh, like you couldn't believe. And his bear hugs were just, that's what I missed the most about him. It's his bear hugs. He was.
Which you can probably still hear the laughs.
I do.
Bit.
I do.
It's the physical embrace. Right?
I do. Yes. And he was just all about helping people. And so I talked to him in my head, and I was like, all right, what do you think? Do you think I should do this? And it was just, yeah. And I just felt something that said, this is the path I need to take. This is what I need to do for my own closure, but also to honor him. Because as the years go by, when you're a parent and you lose a child, as the years go by, you start to panic thinking that people are going to forget about him. That you're the only one that's going to remember him. And you only have so many pictures. You have the same pictures over and over again, nothing new. And I have a 20-second video of him doing the Pete Frady's Ice Bucket Challenge, and I hear his voice. He talks in it, and I go back to that frequently and look at that, and the look on his face was just when he put the bucket over his head, the look on his face was just unbelievable. But I do. I look at that often to hear his voice, and that's the only thing I have left of hearing his voice is that 20-second video. But yeah, and I just think that this is what I needed to do. And not everybody in my family was agreeable to this. Why do you want to keep talking about it? Why do you want to keep talking about it? You're never going to get over it if you keep talking about it. Well, no, you don't. You're never going to get over it. But it's a way to help other people.
And that's the truth, right?
Yes.
You never get over the loss of one of a child.
No, not at all. I mean, it's different. I mean, I've lost my mom. I've lost grandparents, but this is completely different. I mean, it's been 7 years, and I still, on those, doesn't have to be his birthday or his anniversary date, but something will trigger me, and I will it'll go back to like it happened yesterday. And what amazes me about grief is not only the emotional side, but as a mother, it affects you physically. You're physically drained, and just it how hard it is to move around. And a lot of times on those days, his birthday, not so much his birthday, but his anniversary date, I won't go out of the house because I am too distracted to drive, and I'm afraid I'll get into an accident. So I don't, unless somebody wants to take me somewhere, but I typically will not go out of the house. And I noticed on these days, right before these days, I start to withdraw from everything. I don't go to the gym. I don't talk to people. I don't answer text messages. And I really withdraw. And it's not something I can control. I can't. And I've learned over the years, just you got to go with it. You can't try to stuff it down. You can't try to put it on a shelf because it is going to come roaring back when you're not expecting it. And at really inappropriate times. Right, sure. So it's very, very, child loss is very physically demanding, not only mentally, but very physically demanding as well.
So being really self-aware of yourself.
Yes, it's very important.
Allowing yourself to listening to your body, like this is a good day to stay in.
Yep.
Allowing yourself to speak about it as part of your grieving, right? It sounds like the workplace, your employer was incredibly helpful in such a unique way. I mean, it's their business, but they really led with care, versus policy, right? Like just how many days or hours. It was really just about taking care of you, and I'm sure Laura was involved with them as well. Anything else that was central to maintaining that the resilience for your thriving as you got to this point for your journey? Did you start exercising? Was that always part of your daily routine or weekly routine? It sounds like you had the chaplain that was following you. It sounds almost like the United Support for Memorial Workplace Fatalities was mailing you and communicating with you in appropriate ways, just pushing another invitation in front of you once in a while.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, I you stop doing everything for a while because you just can't think straight. You can't make a decision. And probably 6 months or so after I started going back to the gym, I found that when I moved like that, I felt better. And that made me feel a lot better, getting out there and moving again and walking. I do a ton of walking, and that helps as well. But just also having, support people around. I mean, I had joined a grief group not too long ago after he passed for parents who've lost adult children. And I'm still to this day friends with 3 other women from that group. And we do a lot of things together. And their children, the majority of them died from an overdose. So it wasn't anything that I could understand, and they're not understanding my loss. But child loss is child loss. It doesn't matter. Your child is gone. So they were instrumental, and we would, after the grief group was over, we would meet once a month at Panera faithfully and just sit and talk about our kids. And that was therapy in its own.
Oh, I imagine.
And talking to other mothers and saying, hey, this is the way I felt after this. Am I crazy? And I'm like, oh my God, no, you're not crazy. I thought the same thing. It's like, oh, good. You get validated by other folks that
similar experience
with a similar experience, that it doesn't have to be exactly the same. A loss is a loss. But I took comfort in these other ladies that I could go to them and I could say, hey, this is what I'm feeling. Is this, and get validation from them. No, you're not crazy. I'm like, oh, good. So that helps a lot, is by connecting with folks that have had a similar incident. And with this organization, you're connecting with folks across the country who have suffered a fatality, a workplace fatality. So it may not be the same industry or the same, type of thing, but they went through the same process.
Understood, yes.
You know what I'm saying? They went through the same process, investigations and workers' comp and all of that. And everything is, workers' comp is different in every state. So you get to learn how different states, do their compensation program. But by connecting with these families, it is a support system. It is literally a support system. And that's the best way I can say to describe how I am dealing with this, is you have to have that support system in place. You can't do this on your own. I knew right away. I said, I'm going to need help with this. I can't do this on my own. I cannot. And this is why I've embraced this organization, because it's exactly what I need to help me.
We've been talking now for over a year now, and it's just one of the things that really impressed me. I mean, this organization was set up in the Midwest somewhere.
Yes, it was. Yeah,
and under different leadership. And at some point, the baton was passed, and you grabbed hold of it, and reorganized here locally.
Yes, yeah. It was founded by a woman in Kentucky who in 2003 she lost her brother to an aluminum dust explosion, and she quickly realized that it was very difficult to get information on the incident from either the police or OSHA. And she started to think there needs to be a central location for families to be able to go to get help navigating these federal agencies, help navigating the police and the FOIA requests and the workers' comp. And so that's why she started this organization. And then she hired an executive director who's in Nebraska. So it was based both out of Nebraska and Kentucky. And then in 2001, the founder of the organization retired. And then 2003, Tanya Ford was offered a position at OSHA in Washington as their first national family liaison, which she still holds today. She holds that job today. And
really elevating
yes,
the recognition of how important that view is, and just having it in the building in Washington, D.C., which is somewhat removed from the field offices, right? But having someone that's reminding the administrative side of OSHA what their mission is and how critical it is, right?
Yes, and she will inform me of, a family that may be interested in speaking with us and getting the support. I work well with OSHA. A lot of area directors will call me and say, hey, I just spoke to a next of kin. They seemed really open in speaking with you. Can I give you their contact information? And I would call them right away. It's very hard, though, right after the incident happens because the families are getting so much thrown at them. So usually our family members come to us after about a year, because after about a year, they've gone through all the first birthday, the first holidays, anniversary, all of that. And then they turn around and think, all right, what can I do now? And that's where we get most of our family members. They're at least a year out because you can't connect with them right after an incident. It's just too much. It's too much. And so that's kind of, that's kind of the way we kind of roll with that. And then, with no one based in an employee or a member of the executive board in either one of those states, Kentucky or Nebraska, I made the decision back in December to move the organization out and to base it here in Massachusetts. So we are now here in Massachusetts. And I'm working, very hard in connecting with local safety groups. I know some folks at ASSP. I'm doing a lot of speaking presentations now because it's conference season right now. So the next 2 months, I'm like super busy all over the place. But it's something that I just feel so good about. I really do. And I feel good that we're based here in Mass. I think that's going to open a lot of doors for us. I've already reached out to MassCosh. We're collaborating on Worker Memorial Day.
Well, that's great to hear.
So on the steps of the State House. I'm also speaking. I was reached out to by Brian Mitchell at New Hampshire Kosh, and I'll be doing their evening Worker Memorial ceremony up in Hooksett, New Hampshire that same day.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So, yeah.
That's awesome that there's a way for you to participate in both.
Yeah, and not a lot of people know that April 28th is Worker Memorial Day. I didn't know it. I never knew it until my son passed away, that there was an actual day that honors workers, who built this country. And, you take that one day and honor them and remember them.
You framed it, early on where there's a fatality on a job site, and I think you said you had a cousin that had someone that passed in a mining operation, and they lived next door, and they noticed that there was a shutdown for that day, and the next day it was right back to business. So I'm just thinking now that Worker Memorial Day is really important to recognize and reflect on the contribution of those that have passed during the course of business, if you will, during the course of their workday. I think it also just shows respect for the family members and friends and spouses of the workers that have fallen.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does, and it's something that they can come together and have that one day to reflect and remember their love, no matter how long ago. I mean, if they passed a month, a week, a year, or 10 years, it doesn't matter how long. You honor that person because they went to work one day and they didn't come home.
Right. I had the privilege of being invited by Lee Kennedy last May. I think it was on the 13th of last May. They had a project in Cambridge, and Rena was speaking during I'll call it a stand-up meeting versus a stand-down, but everyone got together. They were mesmerized and completely focused on what you were speaking about. Can you just speak a little bit about, how important that opportunity is, and, what the message is that you want to send to the workers in the field?
Yeah, it's very important to speak directly to the workers, not just the employers and the supervisors and the safety managers. It's important to talk to the actual workers doing the work on the ground, because a lot of times in construction, when you work for these big, huge construction companies, a lot of workers will get very complacent and think, oh, if something happens to me, my family's going to get taken care of. I've got I pay into workers' comp. I have a life insurance policy through my employer. My family will be set if something happens to me on the job. That's the furthest thing from the truth. And what I tell these workers is that when you die on the job, okay, workers' comp is going to deny the claim. They will outright deny the claim. They will blame you. You're the reason that you died. You did something, okay? You weren't wearing a hard hat. You weren't wearing a harness. You had medication in your system which caused you to be impaired. That is what workers' comp will do. So by telling workers this, and by saying especially If you are the sole source of income for your entire family, it's very, very important that you come home every day, because if something happens to you and you die on the job, your family is going to get thrown into a financial nightmare, because even if workers' comp pays out, they don't pay out right away. Okay, the family will incur the financial burden of the funeral expenses. The life insurance will only get paid out when the medical examiner is done and there is a cause of death, which can take months. Okay, so that's not, a lot of workers don't understand that. They think that that money's going to come immediately, and it won't. And I use an example. I have a family member in Ohio who is a mother of 6 children, and her husband was only 50 years old. And he passed from a fatal injury he received working at a major automaker plant. And immediately workers' comp denied the claim because he was taking medication for diabetes. And they said it was pain medication, and that meant he was impaired. It took her 8 months and 3 court dates before she saw a dime of workers' comp. And of course,
there's household, there's...
And not only that, 30 days later, I believe it was 30 days later, their health insurance was stripped because no one's paying the premium. So they were without an income. They were without health insurance for about 8 months. And it's just, that's not right. It's not right. And I use that example to try to hit home with these people, especially if you're the sole support of your family. This is what happens. And there's multitudes of stories almost exactly like it, you know, where workers' comp refuses and digs in, and it takes months to get a payment. And these families are left with nothing until then.
On the United Support Memorial for Workplace Fatality, is there a website?
Yes, USMWF.org.
And if someone went there, you don't have to be somebody that's lost a family member in a construction accident.
Any industry. Any fatality in any work situation.
Are there, sounds like there's resources available to sort of self-explore what's available. You indicated that there's usually a month, a year, seems to be like a year before the family's ready to talk to or listen to a person that's part of the organization, but they can self-explore.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, they can. Yeah, well, there's a lot of articles on OSHA. There's resources of grief, you know, how to handle grief, how to manage grief. We actually have a volunteer chaplain on board with us that is available to families should they need help. Or just somebody to talk to, you know, he's available, and he does this on a volunteer basis. The whole organization right now is all volunteer. No one is paid.
That's tremendous.
Nobody's paid. No.
Tremendous. So I mentioned a video earlier, OSHA, Come Home, Safe Stories, Rena and Justin, and it's within it's about a 3-minute long video, but it's very well done.
Yeah, it is.
And you talk about a bench that's in a dog park in Gloucester. Can you just speak a little bit about that?
Sure. So up in Gloucester, there's Stage 4 Park, which is on the waterfront, and it has a dog park, and it's sectioned off in different sections. And Justin's aunt on his dad's side had this bench commissioned with a plaque in his memory. And it has his dates, his birth date and his anniversary date. And I think it says something to the effect of forever in our hearts, and his name. And it's in the section of the dog park that is for dogs with behavioral issues, which Justin would have got the biggest kick out of. He was.
Sounds like it might have been intentional.
I almost think it was. Yeah, and on those, you know, usually January 3rd, his birthday, I will go up there and I will I'll bring flowers and I'll tie a balloon onto the bench and just sit there and reflect and you know, and his anniversary date, I haven't been able to do it. I haven't been able to go. In the beginning I was, but now I just feel very distracted on that day, and I just can't. I don't trust myself. But
well, you indicated earlier that you're physical on that day. You're physically,
yeah. Yes. And but yeah, it's, you know, a lot of people go up to that bench and they sit there, and sometimes, I think the last time I was there was a gentleman sitting on the bench, and I walked up to him and I had the flowers and everything, and I said, I said, excuse me. I said, I don't mean to ask you to leave, but I said, this is my son's bench and today is his birthday. And he looked at the plaque and he's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I said, don't apologize. You didn't know, and he got up and he moved his dogs out to the other end of the park. And then he came back about 5 minutes later and he said, I just want to say I'm so very sorry for your loss. And he had 3 dogs with him and he took them and left. But I've been up there and I've seen people. And when I sit down there, I had a woman come up to me and she said, you're Justin's mom? She said, I knew your son. And that feels so good when somebody
in that environment. He had 2 dogs.
Oh my God. Yeah. And it was just, when people tell me they knew him, and being 7 years out, I don't really hear that anymore. And it's just so, tell me what you know, and I just would, crave hearing more information about him. And it's funny, I was a keynote speaker at the Women in Safety Conference in Keene, New Hampshire back in October. And after I was done speaking, I had a woman come up to me who owns her own safety consulting company. And she introduced herself to me and she said, I just want you to know I knew your son. And I said, how did you know him? And she said, I was the first safety director that a seafood company that both him and his dad work at in Peabody. I was their first safety director that they hired. And she said, I certified your son in forklift training. And I was just blown away. I was literally blown away. And I've been working very closely with this woman. We're trying to find a way to collaborate, with her company. Since then, we've been working very closely together, trying to, and because she said, if we stay in touch, I said, excuse me, you knew my son, we're staying in touch. You're not getting away from me, because those people are few and far between,
right.
And I just hang on every word, when they tell stories and stuff about him, because that's all I have. So,
right? It just warms your heart.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
It's your life's work at this point. I'm sure there's other things going on, but when we've been talking, I'm going down to NASA. I'm going to Washington to speak at OSHA's headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, and then just before we went on the podcast here, you spoke about videos that you helped develop for OSHA to put them in a place where they're listening to someone who's lost a family member, mm-hmm. about how important it is to lead with care and to be empathetic. And I'm sure there are other messages within there. Would you care to share any of those experiences you've had speaking or, working to capture something that can be, cascaded to other generations?
Mm-hmm. I've done a lot of speaking at area OSHA offices in the past, because I'm not getting off topic. I'm just, because it's so important for these investigators. They're so focused on looking for the safety violation, then they have very little interaction with families. So to hear what goes on with a family, and I've been told, because I would go around with the same OSHA guy and we'd hit all the same offices, and he would say to me, Rena, no one's looking at their phone when you're talking. Everybody's fully engaged. And I've had people working at OSHA for like 30 years and they're crying when I'm telling his story. And they say to me, this just reinforces what we do and how important it is and what we do, because we don't have this interaction with the families. We're focused on the policy, the equipment, the machinery, and not with the families. And, the other speaking things I've done is, I spoke at the National Safety Conference, National Safety Council Labor Division meeting last September down in Orlando, Florida. And we were the charity of choice for them back then. And then I found out the beginning of this year for their spring conference, they've never done this in the history of the Safety Council, chosen the same nonprofit to donate 2 years in a row. So I'm pretty proud of that. And they said, your presentation touched us so much that we want to have you be the charity of choice for the spring conference.
That's great to hear.
Yeah. It is. And I'm booking up right now for April and May. It's just Lee Kennedy Construction's got me going at 3 job sites in May.
Yeah. And I know the AGC Mass has you coming down to speak in the first part of April or so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was at MAR training down in Canton last week, and I was just listening in. They were talking about PPE, but it's very informative for me. I like to listen to those things and learn all I can learn. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's great to hear. As we move towards the end, anything that you want to add? Any message that you want to give to employers of any size, small employers, large employers? Any last minute words you want to give to the workers, or really who are really in this place of I need to work. If I open my mouth, I'm the squeaky wheel. Does my employer view me differently?
Mm-hmm.
Anything that you'd like to say regarding those points?
Well, just to the workers especially that there's laws on the books. Employers are not allowed to retaliate against a worker that reports a safety issue. And, you have every right to a safe work environment. That every worker has that right to a safe working environment wherever they are. And if you don't feel safe, you do need to speak up. And if that person that you talk to doesn't listen, you go to the next higher up, and you keep going until someone listens. And they cannot and are not allowed by law to retaliate against you. And I know a lot of workers think that, if I say something, I'm going to get demoted. No, they can't do that. It's against the law. So workers need to know that, and employers need to be, I think, more mindful of workers' safety and listen to them. They're the ones doing the actual work. You can have a site safety manager on duty, but still, if there's a concern, it needs to be raised. And to keep quiet is what's going to cause injuries and what's going to cause death, to keep quiet. And people need to speak up about these things.
Yeah, I agree with that. Even in the planning of work, they should really look to the folks that are performing the work to develop the most sustainable and safe plan.
Exactly. And that's why, with my organization, why we encourage our family members to share their stories. Because when you tell one person, that person tells another person who tells another person, and the chain begins. And somewhere in that chain, someone will take that story to a work site and say, hey, I heard this story. This mother was talking about her son. We have a similar project that we're doing. Let's see how we can make this safer. And that's what happens. And that's how you save lives of folks that you don't even know, just by sharing your story.
Appreciate that very much. I just had a thought. Workers' Memorial Day is coming up next month. If we were to go to the website, USMWF.org.
Yes.
You talked about faces earlier. If we were to have like a toolbox talk or something on Memorial Day, stand down, is there something on that website that we could use to pay respect to the, I'll say, faces of the fallen workers?
There is a video so what we do as an organization is for Worker Memorial, we have a video that we create with different speakers. And then at the end of the video, it has a beautiful, beautiful song by this high school a cappella chorus. They sing this beautiful song, and throughout the entire song, the fallen workers from the website are all fading in and out, and it's absolutely beautiful. It will bring tears to your eyes. It's so beautiful. So you can always pull that video off the website. I do a speech. I have my senator speak. I have a family member talk about their experience, and just talk about how important it is to honor and recognize all of these fallen workers.
I think that's a beautiful way to just remember everyone on that special day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for this opportunity to sit with you. I'm looking forward to, maintaining contact with you and learning how I can help support your mission. If there's anything I can do or we can do, please let us know.
I will. Thank you, Bob. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Best wishes to you and your family.
Thank you. Thank you.